Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's lecture arranged by CAMS, the Center for Asian and Middle Eastern Studies. I'm your host, Dr. Ali Ahmed Shraib. Tonight, we are to have our second lecture on the series Islam as an Open Civilization. This is a 6-part series which is taking place on a fortnightly basis. The aim of the series is to understand how Muslims built an open civilization from Andalusia to India, where people from different cultures lived and flourished together. We have a very distinguished lecturer today for this series, Professor Dr. Recep Senturk. The title of tonight's lecture is Islam as an Open Civilization, Past, Present, and Future. Professor Dr. Recep Senturk currently serves as a professor of sociology at the Ibn Khaldun University. He was the founding president of Ibn Khaldun University in Istanbul. He served as a researcher at the Center of Islamic Studies in Istanbul and the founding director of the Alliance of Civilizations Institute. He is head of the International Ibn Khaldun Society. He has published widely in English, Arabic, and Turkish on a whole range of topics, including social theory and methods, civilization, modernization, sociology of religion, networks of hadith transmission, Malcolm X, Islam and Human Rights, Modern Turkish Thought, and Ibn Khaldun. Amongst his books that are in English, Narrative Social Structure, Hadith Transmission Network 610 to 1505, Malcolm X, The Struggle for Human Rights, and in Turkish, he has published Open Civilization Towards a Multi-Civilizational Society and World, Islam and Human Rights, Ibn Khaldun, Contemporary Readings, and Malcolm X, Struggle for Human Rights, and also Social Memory, Hadith Transmission Network 610 to 1505. Professor Senturk's work have been translated to Arabic, Japanese, and Spanish. So with that introduction, I'd like to just give some ground rules for today's lecture. And I'd like you to, we'll be going straight into the lecture very shortly. I would ask our participants to keep the microphone and the mobile muted until told otherwise. We encourage discussion and debate, maintaining professional approach. We also encourage the attendees to take notes on the lecture for the comments and for question and answer session. The lecture will be approximately 30 to 45 minutes, then followed by the Q&A session, which will last for around another 30 to 45 minutes. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Professor Dr. Recep Senturk to deliver his lecture, please.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum, everyone from different parts of the world. My greetings and best wishes and prayers to you from Istanbul. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Rabbana atina min ladunka rahmatan wa hayyi lana min amrina rashada. In this lecture, I will talk about Islam as an open civilization, past, present, and future. In my previous lecture, I discussed what's a civilization, and I brought in, or I introduced a Khaldunian view, which defines civilization as society. And my classification of civilizations depends on their approach to the other civilizations. And from this perspective, I classify civilizations into two groups: open civilizations and closed civilizations. By open civilizations, I mean those who respect other civilizations, acknowledge their right to exist, and trying to find ways to coexist peacefully with other civilizations. And by closed civilizations, I mean those who see themselves as the only civilization in the world and try to eliminate, destroy, assimilate other civilizations. So this is how I classify civilizations into two groups. So an open civilization is distinguished from other civilizations by inclusivity, inclusiveness, openness to others, and also diversity management inside and outside. And closed civilizations are distinguished from other civilizations by exclusiveness or discrimination, against other societies and civilizations, and trying to standardize, homogenize everyone inside that particular civilization. And they are closed to other cultures, other societies. So from this perspective, if you look at the Western history, Middle Ages is a good example of closed civilization, because Christianity was the dominant view, and they did not tolerate any other view, and not even any diversity within Christianity. Even those denominations, they did not tolerate each other, although they all believed the same religion. So it's a good example of how closed civilization approaches other civilizations. So the wars between different denominations continued in Europe for centuries. And later, secularists, they came and they said, religions cause conflict and war among us. How about abandon religion so that we can have peace? So this was a very attractive proposal and suggestion, and many people bought it. And they abandoned Christianity so that they can have peaceful coexistence. But the opposite happened. Secular ideologies, they formed another model of closed civilization. So those secular ideologies, like a socialism, capitalism, fascism, they did not tolerate each other either. So similar to wars of religion, wars of ideologies, secular ideologies started, which demonstrated that this secular liberal claim that the cause of war is religion, and if we secularize ourselves, then there will be no more wars. But war continued even under the prevalence of secular ideologies in Europe. So from religious type of closed civilization, they moved to secular type of closed civilization. And because they did not acknowledge the right to exist for other civilizations such as Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and the African civilizations. So they tried to destroy all those civilizations and prevail all over the world. So this is like the Enlightenment ideology and modern ideology in the West. So this may be seen as an example of closed civilization. Same with China, Chinese civilization. It was also a very closed civilization from the beginning until now. So they were very closed when they were religious, and after they became secularized, they are still very closed civilization. And India, again, was another example for closed civilization under Hindu culture and religion. So these civilizations may be cited as examples of closed civilization, but in the West, in Europe, especially after World War II, an openness started towards other cultures under like liberal ideologies, but they could not prevail. And today, Europe swings, between closed civilization model and open civilization model. So there are people who welcome immigrants, and there are people who hate and want to kill immigrants. And the same thing, like there is xenophobia, among some circles in Europe and in America, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism. These are all examples of to make open civilization. They are like more open-minded people towards other religions. They defend human rights for everybody. Europe's civilizational approach to the other is very much contested today. But if nationalism became popular, it may end up becoming a closed civilization once again. But if these open-minded people prevail in Europe, then it may become an open civilization at the end. But at the moment, the future is uncertain in Europe and in America. What direction they will take cannot it cannot be places. We see rise of nationalist popularism, but in some areas we see, people, very open-minded, welcoming other cultures. From this vision, from the very beginning until now, how Islam, whether it excluded others or it was open to other religions, cultures, and civilizations. If you use the criteria, the right to exist for other, accommodate and find ways for peaceful coexistence with other civilizations. From this perspective, if you look at Islamic history, we see that from the very beginning, Prophet Muhammad salam established Islam as an open civilization. Before Islamic religion, there was no Islamic civilization. Islam emerged as a religion and civilization at the same time. The area where Islam emerged had no established civilization because it's the middle of Arabia. It is not known as a center of civilization, but Christianity emerged in a place which is known to be center of civilization. Judaism is the same. So what would have happened if Islam emerged, let's say in Iran or in Byzantium or in India or in China, where there are established civilizations? Probably it could have gotten absorbed and assimilated, by the existing civilizations. Actually, this is what happened to Christianity. Christianity was absorbed and assimilated by the existing Western culture, because Western culture, from the Greeks and Romans, Byzantines, was very strong. It absorbed and assimilated Christianity, but there was no such a rooted well-established civilization in the geography, in the location where Islam emerged. So that's why before Islam, there was no Islamic civilization. Islam emerged as a civilization and religion, and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the founder or the one who brought Islam as a religion and also Islam as a civilization. When we say civilization, we mean like a social organization by human beings. So Ibn Khaldun says that like all living beings must live in society. It's instinctive in the animals. It's ilhami, he calls it ilhami. So God inspires them, to organize themselves, as a society. But with regard to human beings, it's iradi. It depends on the will of people, what kind of society they want to build. So Islam guided, Islam provided principles for building a society, for building a civilization. So this is how Islam and religion, as a religion and civilization emerged at the same time. So if you look at the time of Prophet Muhammad and analyze how he approached to the others, like others, and others in his time meant polytheists, Christians, and Jews, because these three groups existed in Arabia, and the best way to analyze it, look at how he dealt with Jews and polytheists who lived in Medina, where he established the first Islamic polity. We have a document, it's called the Constitution of Medina, or the document of Medina, Sahifatul Medina or Wathiqatul Medina. So this document demonstrates very well. It's very unique document because it's in writing. In writing, it brings together different communities who used to fight with each other, like Arabs and Khazraj, two Arab tribes. They fought with each other for centuries. So this document made peace between Arabs and Khazraj and brought them together. And then Arabs fought with the Jews. So this document also brought together Arabs and the Jews together. So because Arabs, their political ideology dependent on tribalism, and those tribes did not tolerate each other. They were like fighting with each other, Arabs and Khazraj, as two different Arab tribes. And also they did not tolerate the Jews, and the Jews did not tolerate any Arabs. So there was a big fight among those groups. But Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam brought these communities and made peace among themselves. And so this was the first model of open civilization. It's very interesting and revolutionary for this time, because at that time, all civilizations in the world, they were closed civilizations. No civilization tolerated people from other religions, other cultures and civilizations. But Prophet Muhammad tolerated those who denied his message, those who denied his gods, those who denied the sacred book he brought. So it's very paradoxical for people, to understand how come someone who declares he's messenger of Allah accommodates in his polity people who deny that he's messenger of Allah. People who deny the book he brought, people who accuse him to be a liar, to be a slanderer. But Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he made a distinction between theology and social and political life. At the level of social and political life, economic life, he gave freedom, to those people who were different from him at the theological level. He criticized their theological approach. He criticized their false beliefs and their corruption in their religion, but he tolerated them. Why did he do so? Inshallah, at the end of the lecture, I will talk about this, what made Islam an open civilization. First, let me illustrate the phenomenon under investigation. So the same thing, continued by subsequent generations. Subsequent generations of Muslims during the Abbasid period, Umayyad period, Seljuk period, Ottoman period, Mughal period, Andalusian period, they all followed the prophetic model of open civilization, which was first established in Al-Medina and was put in writing in the first written constitution of the world. But of course, this is not the only evidence, for the openness of Islam. There are many verses in the Quran, and there are many sayings and practices of Prophet Muhammad, but it takes long time to go into details of it. But there is one verse in the Quran which is very striking. It says, "La ikraha fi din." So Muslims cannot impose their religion on other people. Forcefully convert other people to Islam, it would be a big sin, to force people to convert to Islam. So this is what we see clearly in the Quran in many verses. Quran makes it clear that diversity of races, sexes, languages, religions, this is a will of Allah. This is not an epiphenomenon. It cannot be eliminated, on the face of the earth. So if Allah had wanted, he could have made everybody in the same religion, in the religion of Islam. But he didn't want this. He left it to the free choice of people to accept the divine message which he sent by his messengers. So this prophetic model of open civilization rose first in Al-Medina, and later rightly guided caliphs, Al-Khulafa al-Rashidun, Sayyidina Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali radiallahu anhum, they maintained that model at a period during which Islamic State expanded over areas where people from different religions lived. For instance, Iran. At that time in Iran, there were Zoroastrians. So they worship fire, and people who worship the sun. So Muslims treated them the way they treated Christians and Jews and also the polities in Arabia. But at the same time, I should mention that after the conquest of Medina, people from different religions, they were banned to enter this region called Al-Haram. So they were asked to leave and live outside the Haram, because Haram was like the sanctuary, the sacred sanctuary for Hajj. So in order for them not to disrupt the Hajj rituals, they were asked to leave that region and live outside the Haram region. So this practice continued like under Umayyad and Abbasid rules as well, and Islamic territory continued to expand to other regions, towards India, towards Anatolia, towards Balkans, towards North Africa, and many different religious communities came under the rule of Islam, and they were given the right to coexist with Muslims. So the only way was making tabligh to them, basically explaining Islam to them and trying to teach them, but not forcing them. So there are like two striking examples during this period. The Andalusia example. In Andalusia, Muslims, Christians, and Jews, these three Abrahamic religions, they lived together and established an open civilization under Islamic rule. But if you had let them alone, they would have killed each other. Like Jews and Christians, they would have killed each other, and they would have discriminated against each other. But because they lived under Islamic rule, which was an open civilization, they lived together in peace until the Latins occupied Andalusia and killed anyone who is different than them. So Latins, the Catholics who invaded, Andalusia, present a good example for close civilization, because they did not tolerate anyone who was different than them in that region. They either killed them or forced them to convert to their denomination. So this is a good example of how a closed civilization took over an open civilization, and what happened eventually in that regard. Another very interesting example during this time is the Mughal rule, the Babur Shah, Baburis. Actually, this name Mughal is a completely wrong name for the Baburi state. I don't know where it came from. Probably those British people who invaded India, they thought people who live there, they are Mongolians, and they named them Mughals. I don't know, like the way they named Americans Indians, because they were like very ignorant about the geography. So they did not know that they are not Indians, and they did not know that the Babur Shah people, living in India, they are not like Mughals. They're not. But these wrong names still continues. People still call Native Americans Indians, and Baburis as Mughals. So I don't like to call them Mughals. I like to call them Baburis, because they were the descendants of the Babur Shah. And actually in our history books, they are called Baburis. This is the like a European name given to the Mughals. Anyway, let's use the common name. So this Mughal state ruled over Hindus and Buddhists. And as you know, they are not Ahl Kitab. They are not like a Christian and a Jew. But they were given the same rights as Ahl Kitab, except that Muslims did not marry their woman, and they did not eat the meat they slaughtered. But they gave them the right to coexist with Muslims and practice their religion. So India is a good example of how Muslims approached people who are not Ahl Kitab, under Islamic rule. So it's a good example of open civilization, Islamic open civilization, and how Islamic open civilization integrates, people who are not Abrahamic in religion, who are not Christian and Jew. So that's why I call the Andalusia example of open civilization, Abrahamic open civilization, and I call the Indian model as adamiyyah model of open civilization, because it's like more universalistic, very inclusive, and even the like non-Abrahamic people from Hindu and Buddhist background, they were allowed to coexist with Muslims under Islamic rule. So it's commonly known today that Islam gives a right to exist and freedom of religion to Christians and Jews, but less people know how Islam approach to people who are not from Abrahamic religions, who are not Ahl Kitab, who are not Christian and the Jew. So this is not well known. And there is a common misunderstanding that Muslims only respect Christians and Jews, and they never respect people from other religions. But the example of Islamic rule in India testifies otherwise. The Islamic rule in India demonstrates that Muslims respect all religions, regardless of the theology and practices of that religion. So Muslims, respected Buddhists and Hindus, despite the fact that they did not follow any Abrahamic religion. However, it's Muslims, after they took over India, they banned sati practice. So they gave freedom of religion to Hindus, but they banned sati practice. Sati practice, as you know, like burning the widow after her father dies. So because there's a hierarchy of rights in Islam, and the top right is right to life, and right to religion comes after right to life. So if right to life contradicts with any other fundamental rights, right to life overrides all other rights. So Muslims said, that woman, this widow, has right to live. I mean, you have the right for freedom of religion, but that practice in your religion is not appropriate. So they banned sati practice at that time. So they gave freedom of religion to people under their rule as long as it did not violate fundamental human rights. If it violated fundamental human rights, they put restrictions on them. So you cannot violate any human rights with the pretext of practicing your religion. So this is how it was understood and practiced. There are other examples of this in Egypt and in other areas, but I don't want to go into these details. So I have, some interesting discussions, with the people in the conferences I gave about this issue, because there is a common misperception that Muslims treat only Ahl Kitab, Christians and Jews, nicely, and they don't accept other religions. But we have to correct this, and a good example for this is the Islamic rule in India, to show the universalism of Islam and the existence of universal human rights in Islam. And Muslims don't care about the content of the religion of people, as long as it respects fundamental human rights. Everyone is free to practice his or her religion. So this period, has another interesting example. It's an Ottoman example. I think Ottomans, present a very interesting example how open civilization was practiced in the classical Islamic history, because Ottomans, they inherited this open civilization tradition from Abbasids, Umayyads, Seljuks, but they systematized it even more. And they called it millet system. Millet system. Millet means religious community, which is what we call today civilization. So under Ottoman rule, there were several millets, millah in Arabic, millah. Al-millah means religion and religious community in Arabic. So the Orthodox millah, Armenian millah, Coptic millah, Jewish millah, these were all, religious communities who were given the status of millah under the millet system in the Ottoman Empire. Catholics and Protestants, they were also given the status of millah later. So there were like many millah. So millah, like every millah, had semi-autonomous position. So they were free in their internal affairs. They were allowed to practice their own law, their own religious rituals, use their own language, educate their children according to their own religion, but only in external affairs. Like internal affairs, they were required to act together with Muslims. So this approach reflects the Wathiqatul Medina, or the Constitution of Medina perspective, but in a very large scale, because this is the Sharia perspective. But most of the historians, they don't know that this is the Sharia that regulates, Muslims' relations with non-Muslims. So, like anyone who does not know fiqh, Islamic law, cannot be a good Muslim historian, because Islamic history is a practical manifestation of Islamic fiqh or Islamic jurisprudence. So anybody who does not know Islamic history cannot be a good faqih, and anyone who does not know fiqh cannot be a good Muslim historian, because history is a practical manifestation of fiqh, and fiqh is the theory of Islamic history. Let me give you a good example. when Fatih Sultan Mehmet, the conqueror of Istanbul, conquered Istanbul, he gave freedom to Orthodox Christians in Istanbul. He told them, okay, you are free, to practice your religion. You should live in Istanbul. And later, Ottomans brought in the Jews, and they brought in the Armenians, because before Muslim Turks conquered Istanbul, there were only Orthodox Christians. So Ottomans increased the diversity. They brought in the Armenians, and also they brought in the Jews who escaped from Spain after the Andalusia was reconquered by the Catholics. So in Istanbul lived several religious communities like Muslims, Christians, Jews, Armenians. Within a small city, the head of Muslims, the Khalifa, the head of Orthodox community, the Patriarch, and the head of the Armenian church, the Armenian Patriarch, and the chief rabbi. They all lived in the same city. Can you imagine, like Vatican being shared by leaders of several religions? But it happened in Istanbul, and it continued for so many centuries. So Istanbul, presents a good example of open civilization. And when I was a student in high school, I used to see chief rabbi's place, from the window of my school, and I used to see the caliph's palace, the Topkapı Palace, and also the church of the Orthodox Patriarch, from the window of my high school. And I was like wondering, how come these people, they all lived in the same city, in a very close vicinity to each other, and they had different religions. So later I discovered that fiqh made it possible. But historians who don't know fiqh, they come up with many interpretations to explain why Fatih Sultan Mehmet, the conqueror of Istanbul, granted freedom of religion to Orthodox people. They say he was a very liberal sultan. That's why he gave them freedom of religion. They say he wanted to divide Christian worlds, like Orthodox versus Catholics. So that's why he wanted to keep them in Istanbul. But all of them are groundless. Why? Because all the other conquerors did the same thing in other places. Like when Jerusalem was conquered, I mean, Sayyidina Omar did the same thing there. When Egypt was conquered, Amr ibn As did the same thing there. In Damascus, Muslims did the same thing. So like any place Muslims conquered, they granted freedom of religion. Why? Because of the Sharia, because of fiqh, because Sharia regulates what people do if they conquer a place, whether it's conquered in a peaceful manner or after a war. These are all written, in Islamic law as legal rules. And the branch of fiqh which deals with these issues is called Kitabu Siyar. Kitabu Siyar. Siyar means international law, law of nations. And the first person who wrote a book on international law is Muhammad al-Shaybani, the student of Abu Hanifa. He wrote two books, Kitab al-Siyar al-Saghir and Kitab al-Siyar al-Kabir, about international relations. And his book is translated to English by Majid Khadouri, an Iraqi Christian professor, and published by Johns Hopkins University. Those who are interested can have a look at that book. So anyway, Ottomans systematized this open civilization model, which they inherited from previous Muslim states. we can call this period the classical period of open civilization. And then there is a second period of open civilization, which is the period of reformation. So Ottomans during the 19th century, they made several reforms in their in the way they dealt with people from other civilizations, from other religions. So they abolished the zimmi status. In the classical period, non-Muslims, they were called zimmi. But in 1856, the Ottoman Khalifa and the Sultan, after the advice of the ulama, abolished the status of zimmi, and they made everyone citizen, equal citizens. No more zimmi and Muslim distinction. Everyone is a citizen. They also abolished the jizya tax, because before 1856, Muslims paid tax, and the tax non-Muslims paid, it was called jizya. You know, so Muslims paid tax to the state and also zakat to the poor. And the Christians and the Jews, they paid tax to the state. It was called jizya tax. So in 1856, the Ottoman Khalifa, Abdul Majid, abolished the jizya. He said everyone will pay the same tax, Muslim or non-Muslim. So, so they introduced equal citizenship to Muslims and non-Muslims. They introduced equal taxation to Muslims and non-Muslims. This is in 1856. But also, I should mention that in 1847, they abolished slavery. The Khalifa, based on the advice of the ulama, abolished slavery. So no more slavery after 1846, 47. And after 1856, no more zimmi, no more jizya tax. But many Muslims don't know about these things, unfortunately. So this is the period of reforms, islah, and tajdeed. Of course, they did not call it reform. They called it Tanzimat. Tanzimat means re-regulating, reordering, you know, and also they introduced constitution, parliamentary system, democratic elections. You know, these are all under the Ottoman Empire, which was headed by the Khalifa. So it's a Sharia state, it's an Islamic state, led by the Khalifa, who's advised by the ulama. So this is how they reformed, how they revived the open civilization tradition of Islam. So this period may be called like the second period, and the third period is the colonial period, modern period, the period of modernization. As westernization. I mean, the late Ottoman Empire did not see modernization as westernization. So their approach was rooted revival, you know, reviving based on the principles of Islam. But in the period of westernization, modernization was understood as westernization, and at that time, Muslims accepted closed civilization model from the West, especially nationalism. Nationalism was introduced to Muslim world, and nation-state model was introduced to the Muslim world in this point. So Muslims adopted closed civilization ideology, the secular closed civilization ideologies coming from the West, whether socialist ideologies, you know, emanating or originating from Soviet Union, or you know, or nationalism, you know, coming from Europe, or fascism, you know, again coming from Europe, because they thought these are modern ideologies. When we accept them, we will become modern, and powerful and progressive. But these are evil ideologies. They bring in destruction, wherever they enter. Like I personally believe that there are three evils Europe produced. One is individualism, the other is nuclear family, and the third is nation state. So these are three evils, Europe produced and spread around the world. Individualism, nuclear family, and nation state. And they cause lots of problem around the world. But unfortunately, Muslims adopted this nation state model, which is a big deviation from the open civilization model of Islam. And when they adopted this nation state model, the whole Balkans, the Middle East became areas of conflicts. And this conflict still goes on. Europe themselves, they realized the evil nature of nation state. Now they are trying to leave behind nation state and establish European Union. They want to abandon nationalist ideologies and move on to European identity. But Muslims, unfortunately, they are stuck with this nation state model and nation ideologies. And the fourth stage, the postmodern period, I think in the postmodern period, the whole world needs a revival of open civilization. Because today you cannot create homogeneous societies. I mean, the whole world became like much more diverse compared to the past due to the fast developing transportation technology, communication technology. And I believe that the postmodern period will be a period of open civilization in the whole world. And the whole world needs to learn from Muslims' experience of open civilization, how to manage diversity. One of the strengths of Islamic civilization is diversity management. Diversity management, inside Muslim society, diversity management outside the Muslim society. So within Islam, diversity was promoted in, let's say, like mezahib. There were mezahib in falsafa, there were mezahib in fiqh, kalam, tasawwuf, ethnic diversity, linguistic diversity. So this is a rich tradition, and the whole world today needs to learn from that tradition to manage diversity today. And now there is why question, like why Islam adopted open civilization model in a period during which all other civilizations, they were closed civilizations. What made Muslims promote diversity within Islam, Islamic community? And also what made Muslims abandon open civilization, and adopt closed civilization? Inshallah, these are the questions for the next talks. Thank you very much. Now we can have your questions.
Right, thank you very much, Professor Recep, for the lecture. We hope our audience have taken some notes. I know that was a very full-on whirlwind tour of history and examples from history. And there's been quite a bit of activity on the chat as well. I would just remind everybody, and there's a good number of people with us, at least about 70 people who I'm sure will raise many hands. I just want to, so please do raise your hand, and when I call out your name, unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question. If I can also ask you to keep the question brief and succinct, and also a comment if you wish to make one, also brief and succinct. I just want to very quickly, before I sort of take a question, there was one posed at the beginning by Aisha Said. Wasn't Makkah the center of commerce and polytheistic religions? I feel that even at the advent of Islam, Mecca was a hub where diverse civilizations would come together. And so that was a question by Aisha Said. Do you have any thoughts on that, Professor?
Yes, in Mecca, like Islam was not allowed, because those people who adopted the Mushrik ideology, they did not tolerate Muslims. It was a place for commerce, like you make your commerce and leave, and only those like people who adopted Mushrik ideology, they were allowed, to live in Medina. That's why Muslims, they were not allowed to live there. So we cannot call like Mecca as a model of open civilization.
Well, thank you for that. May I ask, so just to remind you, we have 30 minutes for Q&A, so do please try and be brief with your questions so we can get a lot more in. And remember, there's 4 more lectures to come. They will be all related to this topic. And, I'm sure it will enlighten us as we go forward. So can I ask Shahriar Malik to unmute yourself, please, and ask a question or give your comment?
Thank you. And Professor, I would like to ask you that you talked about Islam tolerating other religions and civilizations, but the question is tolerating enough? A common thing that is pointed out by liberal point of view is that toleration still denotes that there is the domination of one of the religions. For example, in Islamic State, if Islamic State tolerates others, it means that the Islamic ideology or civilization is still dominant in that scenario. So what would be your comment on this? Thank you.
Yes, it's a good question. As I mentioned, in the case of Andalusia, if you let Jews rule, they would discriminate and wouldn't give any rights to Christians and Muslims. And if you give power to Christians, they would eliminate Muslims and the Jews, as it happened like when Christians took over. They killed Muslims and the Jews, or they had to run away from Andalusia. So that's why Muslims had to be the ruling power. In order those opposing communities can coexist. Otherwise, if you made them if you made like Christians or the Jews or the Hindus or the Buddhists the ruling power, they could not establish such an open civilization. They could not manage diversity. So this kind of diversity management could only be established by Muslims. Otherwise, they would oppose each other, kill each other, and eliminate each other.
But sir, if I may, what would you say about the modern secular nations where the constitution is secular and they claim that everybody is equal, or every religion or ideology can be equal under that?
Yes. As I said, there are 2 interpretations of liberalism. One is like very genuine liberalism. It tolerates different religions. The other very dictatorial, authoritarian interpretation of liberalism. So the question is, can liberalism tolerate anything other than liberalism? Yeah, and
good
in
question.
most cases, those liberals don't tolerate anyone who's not liberal like themselves. So we need like a genuine liberalism. People who can tolerate, people who are not, who don't share the secular liberal ideology. See what I mean? So then it becomes genuine liberalism. That's the kind of liberalism I defend. If we can tolerate, people who are not like us, and give them right to exist, then we are genuine liberals. Like Prophet Muhammad, he was tolerating people who accused him for being a liar, who rejected his God, his book, his religion. but he was giving them right to exist, and freedom of expression. So that this is the genuine liberalism.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. May I ask, we have a few more hands now. Again, please keep your question and comment brief. Rajiv Kumar, please, if you kindly unmute and ask your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Recep Senturk. I have so many questions to ask, but we have very limited time. You said that open civilization, Muslims were very tolerant. Even like in the Indian context, when we talk, I mean, when the Delhi Sultanate was established, Ibrahim Lodi fought with the Babur. They both were Muslims. What would be your comments like when you are going to talk about tolerant? I mean, they were fighting together. And second thing that you said, Hindu were close civilization. Even the Hindus, they welcome Muslims in their homeland. After the independence, even when the Hindu were majoritarian, still, I mean, they formed the constitution where Muslim can have their representatives as well. So it is not when we call like India today, it's a Hindu country, but it's a Hindu, Muslim, Christians, all are identified.
Thank
Yes,
you.
I am talking about the classical period. In the classical period, they did not acknowledge, other religions, and they did not look for ways to coexist with them. But even in the modern period, though this like kind of secular ideology allowed acknowledging some liberal perspective, acknowledging other religions to coexist with the Hindus and the Buddhists, in India. So it's it is complicated. I mean, and even today, like we have some Hindu nationalists, reflecting the remnants of this closed civilization perspective. They are against anyone else in India, like a Muslim or anybody who's not Hindu, should not be given any right, to exist. So they are fighting against them. But of course, there are some liberal-minded, open-minded Hindus. So they respect, other religions, and they want them to coexist with Muslims, similar to Europe. So in Europe also, there are two trends. One trend trying to make Europe a closed civilization and exclude anyone who's not, who's not Christian, who's not Western. Just get rid of them from Europe, and the same kind of conflict exists in Hindu domain as well. But in Islam, this is regulated by Islamic theology. It's in the sacred book of Islam. It's in the Quran. It's a rule of Sharia. It's in Islamic law. So it's not left to your good heart or your good intention. It's dictated on you by your own religious law. So and it's systematized from the beginning until now. So that's the strength of Islam. But in other religions, like even among Christians, there are good-hearted Christians, very open-minded to any religion, or even the Jews. They are very open-minded people, but it is not in their sacred book. It is not regulated by their canonic religious law. So that's why those communities, they are divided. There are two interpretations, two approaches in those communities, because it is left, to their understanding, and interpretation. Yes.
Thank you, Professor. Can I ask invite the next question from Mr. Masir Ali. If you could lower your hand, unmute yourself, and ask your question, please.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. My question is about the relationship between history and fiqh. As a student who's studying fiqh, particularly Hanafi fiqh, what do you recommend to study or books to look out when you want to trace the development of Kitab al-Siyar or international law and all these type of stuff from the early period of Islam to like much later periods?
Yes, inshallah, this is the topic of my next lecture. I will talk about the principle of adamiyyah and multiplexity. This is an answer to what made Islam an open civilization. So I will talk about the theological foundations, the fuqaha, who wrote on this topic in Hanafi, Shafi, Maliki, Hanbali mazhabs. So I will make citations from classical fiqh books from Sarakhsi, Marganani, and the Shafi, Maliki, Hanbali fuqaha, inshallah ta'ala. So I will talk about the principle of adamiyyah in Islamic fiqh, in Islamic law, and how it provided a universalistic ground, a very inclusive universalistic ground in Islamic law to make Islamic political system, legal system, moral system very inclusive, to all people regardless of their religion, the principle of adamiyyah, inshallah ta'ala. And I will also talk about the worldview behind it, the multiplex worldview based on maratib al-wujud, maratib al-ulum, maratib al-usul, inshallah ta'ala, because these are the two important foundations of open civilization, multiplex worldview and the principle of adamiyyah, universal humanism. In Islamic law, in fiqh and Islamic theology, inshallah ta'ala. So in our next lecture, we'll talk about this multiplex worldview and also the adamiyyah, and these are the two foundations of Islamic open civilization. So Islamic open civilization is not like based on the good hearts or individual interpretations of people. As I said in my previous answer, it is systematized, in Islamic theology, Islamic law. So that's why all Muslims, like when they reached to a new land or when they conquered a new land, they practiced that law. They could not act otherwise. They had to give freedom of religion, to people there. Of course, sometimes you find some deviations, by some rulers from Sharia. These are exceptions, of course. I mean, not all Muslims were angels. There were some people who deviated, from Islamic law, and they made some malpractices. I'm not trying to whitewash, the whole Islamic history, and they were all angels and they did all good things. But this is Islamic law, and this is the general practice. And there might be some exceptional deviations, from the general practice. This is history, a long history, extending for 15 centuries, and in a wide geography. You find all kinds of people in that vast geography and long history. But this is the general practice based on set principles in Islamic theology, in the Quran, in the Sunnah, and in fiqh. And I will explain this, how it evolved over centuries. And I will share with you the sources in Islamic law.
Thank you. I'm just going through chronologically the hands that went up. So may I ask Dr. Mubashir Zia to lower his hand and unmute himself and ask his question, please, as the next question or comment. Dr. Mubashir Zia. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaykum salam.
Doctor, you were talking about one thing, that you cannot be a faqih if you are not well aware or knitted with the history and the historical events which have happened before. So there are, while sitting in Pakistan and having multiple versions of history in front of us, which has came to us from different sources, how to judge that which source is reliable and which source is authentic? Because there are different versions of the same thing, even in the Islamic history.
Yes, a very good question. So Muslims developed a particular discipline dedicated to establish soundness of narrations. It is usul al-hadith. So by using usul al-hadith, you establish soundness of a narrative. It is called thubut. The technical term for it is thubut. You know, if something is narrated, you know, about Prophet Muhammad, his ashab, history, you know, you have usul al-hadith to critically analyze by looking at the chain of narrations, narrators, parallel narrations, the content, and the individual narrators, their academic competence and their integrity, al-adala wal-zabt. You know, I have a book on this. It's called Narrative Social Structure, Anatomy of Hadith Transmission Network, 610 to 1505. Is published by Stanford University Press. You know, I mean, if you are interested, you can have a look at this. So this is about the soundness of the narration. And then Muslims established another discipline, is usul fiqh. Usul fiqh is about proper interpretation of the sources after their soundness is established. You know, so if you want to critically analyze and see whether it is, you know, a proper interpretation of the Quran or Hadith, then you need to use usul al-fiqh, which is a very critical discipline, very methodological, very rational, about proper interpretation of sound narratives, sound material. You know, so you have two disciplines, usul hadith and usul fiqh. Usul hadith to critically analyze and establish soundness of the material narrated to us, to sift, you know, the fabricated from the genuine narrations. And usul fiqh is about proper interpretation of those materials, scriptures, Quran and Hadith. You know, so you use usul fiqh to judge, you know, if something is reported to you to be like ijtihad or fatwa, whether it is real or not, you know, whether it is proper or not. So my statement about knowing history is very important. Like, how did Prophet Muhammad والسلام, practice Islamic law in his time? We have to know this, you know, in order to be a good faqih. And how the Khulafa al-Rashidun, the four rightly guided caliphs, practiced Islamic law. You have to know this. You know, you cannot simply know like abstract rules and then make fatwa out of it. And how the Abbasid, Umayyads, Selçukis, Ottomans, Baburis, Andalusia, like how those like principles, these universal abstract principles, they were practiced. You know, knowing this thing makes you real faqih. You know, real faqih, and also knowing the theoretical ideas, behind what Muslim rulers did, how Muslim individuals lived in history, makes you real sociologist, real historian, real social scientist. Otherwise, you cannot penetrate the ideas or the normative system behind the actions of people. I mean, if you want to understand, like Muslims living in UK today, you cannot understand simply by observing what they are doing. You have to know their religion. You have to know the Islamic law they are practicing. You have to know like aqaid, kalam, tasawwuf. Otherwise you cannot penetrate, the meaning behind their actions simply by observing the apparent reality. Same with the Islamic history. So today we don't have good fuqaha because they don't know Islamic history. They don't know how Islamic law was practiced by the Ottomans in the classical period, late Ottoman period, by the Baburis, Umayyads during the time of Prophet Muhammad. They are just reading abstract rules and trying to put them in practice. Big problem. We have to teach our fuqaha, our ulama, Islamic history as well, but in a genuine way, as you said, in a sound way, and every Muslim must learn usul hadith and usul fiqh, in order not to be fooled and misguided, by some wrong ideas.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm not sure if Zoom has a gender bias or not, but I promise you, Aisha Fayaz, I haven't put you at the end of the list deliberately. You just happen to, even though you've had your hand up for such a long time. So may I invite you to lower your hand and unmute yourself and ask your question, please, or comment.
Assalamu alaikum, Professor. My question is that how far were the Ottomans successful in creating an open civilization? What would be some indicators of that?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yeah, very good question. Some people believe that Islam had a golden age and then all the dark age. Like those, there are some like, groups who believe that Islam was practiced only during the time of Prophet Muhammad and the Khulafa Rashidin. And after that, everything went wrong. I agree with this approach. I believe that Islam was practiced properly from the very beginning until the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Of course, there were some mistakes, some exceptional, occasional deviations, but I believe the practice of Islam continued from the beginning until the end. I reject the idea of golden age of Islam because it implicitly indicates there was a dark age. I believe it's all golden age, from the beginning until the end. Alhamdulillah, Islam was all practiced very well, despite some, occasional deviations, mispractices, malpractices, but they were not like the mainstream. I reject the idea of dark age of Islam, that after the beginning of like the first century, everything went wrong. This idea of Islamic golden age as the first century, and then all dark age, like 15 centuries, dark ages. This idea makes Muslims lose confidence, in their civilization, in their religion, in their culture, and reject this heritage of Islam, which Muslims produced for so many centuries. So those who accept this kind of approach, I call them liquidation ideologies. liquidation of Islamic civilization, like closing the store, liquidating the company, liquidating the heritage of Islamic civilization and destroying everything. Then at the end, you have youth, which hates their ancestors, their civilization, their history. They think like Ottomans were wrong, Selçukis were wrong, Andalusia was wrong, Umayyad was wrong, Abbasid was wrong, Baburis were wrong, everybody was wrong, except us. We are the righteous people. This kind of ideology, this self-righteousness is very dangerous. Like I personally believe that the mainstream Islam, continued from the very beginning until the end, and even today it continues. Majority of Muslims are good. This is how I believe. Like 99% of Muslims, they are very good, mashallah. Of course we have like 1%, 2%, some extremists, people who are involved in some wrong practices. So I believe, respecting the mainstream Islamic history is well grounded, and historical studies demonstrate that Islam was very vibrant up until like 19th century, and I believe today is also Islam is very vibrant in the whole world, and Islam has the potential to make contribution to the whole humanity. And one of the significant contributions we can make to whole world, the whole humanity, is sharing with them this idea of open civilization, this practice of open civilization. I mean, like Ottomans, the Andalusians, the Barbaries, they preserved diversity under their rule. Look at what happened after the collapse of Ottoman Empire in Balkans. It's all bloodshed. Middle East, all bloodshed. Like India, always conflicts. So like Muslims preserved diversity and managed diversity of religions and those different societies and cultures and civilizations under their rule, without trying to homogenize them, without trying to standardize them. So this is a very clear and concrete evidence about the success of Muslims in diversity management and establishing open civilization.
Thank you very much for that. I think we are very rapidly coming to a close of our session today. And I know each statement, each answer provokes another 10 questions, and I can see that I must kindly decline some of the hands that are up now, because just for the brevity of time now, I cannot be fair to the 3 or 4 hands that are raised. Please feel invited to join in the subsequent lectures that are coming in the next few weeks. And please do note your question down. Please join our WhatsApp group where you can pose these questions, and we'll try and get them to Professor Recep, to him to answer, or maybe address at the next talk, if you can incorporate those questions. And I really thank you all for participating today. It's been an excellent session, and for your notes, for your comments and your questions. And really, the next topic is going to be the lecture on the 16th of September, which is Thursday, on the topic of Islam as an open civilization, multiplexity. I look forward to that. And we thank Professor Dr. Recep Senturk for delivering your lecture. We thank you all for taking part and making valuable contributions to this discussion, and look very much forward to seeing you again in the next lecture as well. So please forgive me, but I must close our lecture tonight due to the brevity of time. See you at the next lecture. Good evening.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you.